Imagine this: your wife goes for a morning jog, comes back with a gun in her face. Not from a cop, not from a criminal, but from a fake HOA officer who thought he was the law. My wife isn't just any Joga, she's active Delta Force. And in less than 30 seconds, this wannabe cop went from pointing a gun to begging for mercy. And when the real police showed up, the HOA president, the one who orchestrated it, all was the one leaving in handcuffs. You want to hear how the entire neighborhood turned on her? Stick around, because this HOA story only gets crazier. The pistol glinted in the sun, its barrel trembling inches from my wife's face. The man holding it, late 50s belly, pressed against a too-tight tactical vest, stood on our front lawn, sweat dripping from his forehead like he was auditioning for a bad cop drama. His eyes bulged with a mix of fear and arrogance, and his voice cracked as he barked orders he clearly didn't understand. All of this, just because my wife jogged past the HOA clubhouse without carrying identification. I froze for a moment, coffee still in my hand, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. We had moved into this neighborhood for peace. Claire wanted quiet mornings and a garden, maybe a flock of chickens in the backyard. I just wanted reliable fiber internet and a basement I could turn into my cybersecurity cave. What we got instead was an HOA that thought it was a paramilitary organization. They called themselves the Home Safety Division, or HSD, which sounded official until you realized it was just a group of middle-aged homeowners in matte black golf carts with zip-tied blue lights and stenciled letters that made them look mysterious, that made them look like discount SWAT vans. Their leader, Karen Brewster, greeted us on move-in day with laminated badges, 3 clipboards, and a plastic smile that said she'd never been told no in her life. She handed us a thick booklet of rules, filled with nonsense like grass must not exceed 2.75 inches in residence, must not appear intimidating during recreational activity. I laughed when I first read it, but Claire just nodded politely. She's good at that, blending in, hiding the steel under her calm demeanor. What Karen and her clipboard warriors didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that my wife wasn't just another suburban transplant. She was an active Delta Force operative who had returned from a classified mission 2 days earlier. She hadn't even unpacked her field gear yet, and now some wannabe rent-a-cop was pointing a knockoff Glock at her chest like it was going to intimidate her. Claire stood perfectly still, hands slightly raised, her eyes locked on him. She tilted her head the way she does when she's bored during long briefings, then spoke in a voice so calm it made my skin prickle. "Sir, under Florida Statute 790.10, brandishing a firearm in a threatening manner is a felony. You should think very carefully about your next move." The man blinked. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, much less quoted legal codes. "Don't you quote laws to me?" he snapped. "This is HOA jurisdiction." I almost laughed, but Claire beat me to it. She actually chuckled low, steady, and dismissive. "The HOA doesn't outrank the Constitution," she said. "You've just committed attempted assault with a deadly weapon. And trust me, you don't want to know how this ends if you keep pushing." 2 other men flanked him, each in mismatched vests, each clutching flea market batons, like they were medieval knights instead of overweight neighbors. They shifted nervously, clearly unsure whether to escalate or back away. That was when I finally stepped outside, setting my coffee mug on the porch railing. "Gentlemen," I said, loud enough for the neighbors starting to gather at their windows, "this is your last chance to walk away before things get very, very sideways." The leader swung his pistol toward me. "Stay out of this, sir. This is an official enforcement action of the Home Safety Division." Claire smirked. Her muscles tensed. Her stance shifted. I'd seen this before she was about to move. When she did, it happened so fast I almost missed it. Claire's body snapped into motion faster than the man could process. She sidestepped his line of fire, her hand snapping to his wrist with surgical precision. A twist, a shift of weight, and the pistol clattered across the pavement before he even understood. It was gone. She shoved him backward into one of his baton-wielding buddies, sending both sprawling into the grass. The third man charged, yelling like a wannabe warrior. Claire ducked under his swing, swept his legs, and pressed him into the ground with her knee at the small of his back. He thrashed for all of 3 seconds before realizing he wasn't going anywhere. She didn't even break a sweat. The supposed leader rolled on the lawn, clutching his wrist and groaning. "You broke it," he whined. Claire crouched low, her face inches from his. Her voice dropped to that razor-edge softness I'd only ever heard when she was dead serious. "No, if I'd broken it, you wouldn't be holding it right now." That was a warning. By then, half the neighborhood had gathered. Curtains twitched, phones recorded, and whispers carried through the air. A woman on her porch gasped. Another muttered, "Is that Karen's crew?" And then, like clockwork, Karen herself appeared storming across the street in her visor. Oversized sunglasses and trademark clipboard clutched like it was a badge of office. "Arrest her?" Karen shrieked. "She assaulted my officers. We all saw it, witnesses everywhere." Claire stood, dusting her hands like she'd just finished pruning roses instead of disarming 3 grown men. She looked Karen dead in the eye, her smirk slow and cutting. "Your officers, lady, they're about to be defendants." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, until 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled into the street. Lights flashed red and blue across stucco walls and neatly trimmed hedges, scattering the curious crowd like startled birds. Deputies stepped out with hands on their belts, eyes scanning the ridiculous Scene 3 wannabe tough guys groaning in mismatched tactical gear. One pinned under my wife, and Karen shrieking about authority. "Drop the weapons!" a deputy barked. "They already did," I said, pointing at the pistol still lying 10 feet away. Claire rose slowly, stepping back with her hands relaxed and visible, her composure radiating the kind of confidence that only comes from years of training in places no civilian ever wanted to be. The deputy's eyes flicked to her, then back to the sprawled men. They knew instantly who the threat had been. Karen rushed forward, clipboard flapping like a wounded bird. "Officers, arrest that woman immediately. She's out of control." Attacked my hired security. The closest deputy frowned, lips pursed. "Hired security? Ma'am, these men are impersonating law enforcement." He nodded toward the groaning trio. "You realize that under 18 U.S. Code, impersonating a federal officer is a felony, right?" One of the men cracked immediately, babbling before the deputy even finished. "It wasn't my idea. Karen paid U.S. She said it was legal." Karen's face went crimson, her jaw snapping shut like a mousetrap. But it was too late. The damage was done. The deputies moved in, cuffing the 3 men while rattling off charges: brandishing a firearm, impersonating an officer, attempted assault, conspiracy, trespassing. Karen tried to backpedal toward the clubhouse, but another deputy intercepted her, gripping her arm firmly. "Not so fast. You're coming with us too? Or did you think orchestrating a fake armed raid was going to slide under the radar?" Karen twisted, her voice rising into a screech. "This is harassment. I'm the HOA president. I demand you release me." The deputy shook his head, unimpressed. "Lady, you're under arrest for solicitation to commit assault. It's conspiracy and aiding and abetting impersonation of an officer. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." The crowd gasped. Some neighbors clapped. One man whistled. For the first time since moving in, I saw real unity in this community, everyone agreeing on one thing. Karen had finally gone too far. I crossed my arms, unable to resist a grin. "You should have stuck to writing passive-aggressive letters." Claire picked up my coffee mug from the porch railing and handed it back to me like nothing had happened. "I told you it wouldn't take long." The sheriff's cruisers pulled away with Karen and her officers stuffed in the back seats, their flashing lights bouncing off stucco walls and manicured lawns. The neighborhood that had been simmering with tension for months suddenly felt alive with relief. People lingered in their yards and driveways, whispering, laughing nervously, or openly cheering like they'd just watched the final act of a drama they'd secretly hoped for all along. For me, the adrenaline still hadn't faded. My wife stood next to me, calm as ever, sipping the coffee she'd reclaimed from my hands. You'd never guess she had just dismantled 3 armed men in under a minute. That was Claire's gift, switching from steel to serenity in the blink of an eye. Within an hour, The HOA board scrambled together an emergency meeting. Word traveled fast, and by the time we showed up at the clubhouse, mostly out of curiosity, the parking lot was overflowing with neighbors. No one wanted to miss the fallout. Inside, the board members sat at their folding table like deer caught in headlights. Without Karen's clipboard slamming down rules and threats, they looked small, unsure, exposed. Papers were scattered, microphones squealed with feedback, and murmurs filled the room until finally one elderly treasurer cleared his throat. We'd like to assure the community that the Home Safety Division program has been suspended. That single word suspended set off a wave of groans and scoffs. People shouted from the back. Suspended. Try abolished. They had guns pointed at people. My kids were scared to walk the dog because of those golf cart goons. The treasurer adjusted his glasses nervously. Yes, well, with the pending criminal charges, it appears President Brewster will no longer be serving on the board. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some clapped, and others simply sighed with visible relief. A neighbor leaned toward me and whispered, "About damn time." Claire didn't speak, didn't gloat. She just watched quietly, arms crossed, her eyes scanning the room like she was still on mission. I knew she was evaluating every angle, every exit, every twitch of body language. Old habits die hard. One board member, a balding man with sweat stains on his polo, tried to regain control. Now, let's not overreact. The HOA still needs leadership. We'll be taking nominations for a new president, not it. Someone shouted immediately. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Another neighbor raised their hand just to say, "Hard pass." It became painfully clear that no one wanted the job, not after what Karen had turned it into. The HOA had been reduced to a punchline, a cautionary tale. That evening, as the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, people began knocking on our door. Some brought casseroles, others just words of gratitude. "I don't know how you stayed so calm," one woman told Claire, her voice trembling. Another man shook my hand firmly, saying, "Your wife saved this place." Claire accepted the thanks with grace, nodding politely, but never letting on who she really was. Only a handful of people in the world knew she was still active in Delta Force, and she intended to keep it that way. But whispers traveled fast. By the end of the night, half the block was convinced she was ex-CIA, while others speculated she'd been a cop or federal agent. No one guessed the truth, and that was fine with us. Later, we sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, turning the street golden. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "Think they'll ever try something like that again?" Claire sipped, her eyes scanning the quiet street. Her smirk was small, but sharp. "If they're stupid enough, I'll be ready." In that moment, I realized the HOA had done more than just embarrass themselves. They had drawn a line in the sand. And now, everyone in the neighborhood knew exactly which side Claire and I stood on. A week later, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, lawns were still clipped to suburban perfection. Sprinklers still hissed at dawn. Kids still pedaled bikes down the cul-de-sac, but the air had changed. The fear, the constant second-guessing about which rule you might be breaking, was gone. The HOA's self-styled Home Safety Division had collapsed overnight, and no one missed it. Karen, meanwhile, was plastered across the local news. "President arrested for orchestrating armed patrol," read the headlines. Video of her being shoved into the back of a squad car went viral, her visor askew, her voice shrill as she shouted about harassment. Neighbors, who had been too intimidated to speak up before, now lined up to file complaints, lawsuits, and petitions. Karen's empire of laminated rules and power trips was crumbling in real time. For Claire, life settled back into its strange version of normal. She gardened, she jogged, she waved politely at neighbors, who now watched her with a mix of respect and awe. Some whispered thank you when she passed. Others offered to mow our lawn or bring groceries, as if trying to repay a debt. Claire never made a big deal of it. To her, it was just another mission handled, another threat neutralized. Me. I finally finished wiring my basement for fiber and dove back into my security projects. But every so often I'd catch myself glancing at Claire, remembering how effortlessly she'd taken control of that chaos, I knew better than anyone that what she did that day wasn't luck. It was discipline, training, and a lifetime of walking into danger and walking back out. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sky turn violet, a group of neighbors approached, not with complaints or demands, but with a simple question. Would Claire consider joining the HOA board, maybe even as president? The look on Claire's face was priceless. She chuckled softly, shook her head, and said, "Trust me, don't want me running this place." They laughed nervously, but I could see the relief in their eyes. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of the board. They were hopeful. Karen's trial came a few months later. She tried every excuse in the book. Misunderstanding, miscommunication, persecution, none of it worked. The recordings, the witnesses, the sheer absurdity of her home safety division made the jury's decision easy. Convicted on multiple counts: impersonation, conspiracy, solicitation, she was led away in cuffs again, this time for good. When the verdict hit, the neighborhood gathered for an impromptu block party. No rules, no clipboards, no laminated lists of what was allowed. It's just food, music, laughter, and the kind of freedom Karen had tried to strangle out of the place. Claire? And I sat with paper plates balanced on our laps, listening to kids shriek with joy as they darted between sprinklers. For once, it actually felt like the community we'd hoped for. As the night wound down, I leaned toward Claire, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "You realize, right? They'll never mess with us again." Claire smirked, eyes on the quieting street, the glow of porch lights flickering to life one by one. "They'd be smart not to. But if they do..." She set her tea down and stretched like a cat after a nap. "I'm always ready for it." "A warm-up." I laughed, shaking my head. "You and your version of warm-up." She smiled, serene as ever. But beneath that calm exterior, I knew the truth. My wife wasn't just a neighbor in a quiet suburb. She was Delta 4 sharp, unstoppable, and utterly fearless. And thanks to her, the HOA had finally learned one brutal, unforgettable lesson. They had picked the wrong family.